Consent that the roll call used on passage of the bill be used to make it so effective.
Senior Senator from the 17th moves that the bill be made effective from passage and requests unanimous consent that the roll call used on the passage of the bill be used to make it so effective. Is there objection? Chair hears none on this question. 32 yeas, 0 nays, 2 absent, not voting. More than 2/3 of those elected to the Senate having voted in the affirmative, I declare the bill effective from passage. The clerk will communicate the actions of the Senate to the House.
Engrossed committee substitute for House Bill 3018, establishing that 18 is the age of consent and removing the ability of an underage person to obtaining a consent to marry through their parents, legal guardians, or by petition to the circuit court. Third reading of the bill. The bill was advanced to third reading with the right to amend.
Are there amendments to the bill?
Yes, sir. Senators Trump, Azinger, Chapman, Hunt, Martin, Maynard, Rucker, Stover, Stewart, and Taylor move to amend the bill by striking out everything after the enacting clause.
Senator from Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I request unanimous consent to explain the amendment in lieu of having it read.
Is there objection? Chair hears none. Senator from Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. President. And if the Senate will indulge me a little bit, I want to begin this explanation by apologizing, Mr. President, to you and to the Judiciary Committee and the Senate as a whole, because I sort of botched the management of this bill in the Judiciary Committee the other night. I got a little bit rattled, and you know, we did not end up with a full consideration of amendments or discussion that we would normally expect. We began the discussions with a motion to table, and it rattled me a little bit. And you know, I think we had. Members will remember we had to employ an unusual practice under 34 to get the bill to the floor of the Senate yesterday, because the bill failed in committee on a 1-vote margin, 8-9, the House bill without any amendments. And I think had I been better at managing the committee Wednesday night, Mr. President, none of that might have been necessary. Having said that, the sponsors of this amendment have crafted what we hope would be an acceptable compromise. And let me begin by saying it's an important question, Mr. President, and in my opinion, we really need to take some action. West Virginia has the highest rate of child marriage in America, all 50 states. It's not good. Our current law has no minimum age for marriage. None. A judge can order and approve a child to get married at any age. We're only one of a handful of states that have such provision in our law. There are a handful of states that say 18 only. You know, no exceptions, no under, and then the vast majority of states are in between and have procedures to allow people to marry at 16 or 17. That's what the amendment before us does. It requires the flat bold statement and rule is you have to be 18 years to get married. You're 18 years old. A person has to be age 18. A person under the age of 18 lacks the capacity to marry without the consents required in this section. And the change in the law now will say a person who's 18, who's not 18, but at least 16 years of age, can marry if the person has the consent of the legal guardian or guardians as outlined in this section. And a marriage license, now there's a proviso in that. Just because you're 16 doesn't mean, and even if your parents consent under this, it doesn't mean you can marry anybody. There's a proviso that says a marriage license may not be issued to an applicant who is under the age of 18, but who is at least 16 years of age, if the person whom the applicant seeks to marry is more than 4 years older than the applicant. So we're not going to have, if this becomes law, we're not going to have in West Virginia 16 or 17-year-olds marrying 25 or 26 or 27-year-olds. It'll be prohibited flatly under the law. And this amendment takes out all the provisions of our law which now allow someone under the age of 16 to get married. I know this has been a contentious issue among a number of people. My hope is that this will be viewed as a reasonable and acceptable compromise and a necessary change to our law. It'll bring West Virginia in line with the vast majority of states in the country. I'd be happy to try to answer questions. Otherwise, I urge adoption of the amendment.
So further discussion. Junior Senator from the 7th.
Mr. President, I stand in support of this amendment. I want to talk about this, and I'll be as brief as I can be, but I don't know that there's been another subject as distorted in the national media as has been this story. I've been troubled by it. USA Today's headline, "Bill to Outlaw Teen Marriages in West Virginia Gets Defeated in Committee on International Women's Day." One of the lines in this article says some of the bill's opponents have argued that teenage marriages are a part of life in West Virginia. This is fake news. We know there's a lot of national media publications, fake news. This fake news. We did vote that down. We've come back with what is an incredibly reasonable proposal. The subject's been distorted, I think, for political purposes on the national level. Folks like to look at West Virginia and talk about that redneck state of West Virginia when we're exactly the opposite. The improvements we've made, the improvements this body's made with the House of Delegates and our governor over the past 5 to 8 to 10 years, it's remarkable. We're leading the country in a lot of statistics. I want to point out what the law is in West Virginia today before we do anything. In West Virginia today, as it presently stands, you must be 18 in the state of West Virginia to get married. You can be as young as 16 in West Virginia with parental consent. The only exception to that is by judge's waiver, I think there's some folks that think that this bill, this marriage bill, this child marriage bill, if you want to call it, somehow is going to fix human sex trafficking, child sex exploitation in West Virginia. It won't do that, even with our provisions in this amendment, but I support them. But I tell you, I wanted to make sure my numbers were right. I wanted to see what the actual numbers were. So I had my assistant today, directly from the Director of Vital Statistics in West Virginia. And I got a copy of this for everybody if you want to see it. These statistics are from 2012 to 2021. These are the official West Virginia statistics on this issue. It's remarkable how few marriages are happening under the age of 18. In fact, based on the official statistics from West Virginia, we had 6 marriages of those who were 14, 15 for a 10-year period of time. All of those had to have judicial determination. Of those 6, the marriages were to individuals 21 or younger. One of those was a 17-year-old male and a 15-year-old female. Of all the statistics in here, even of 16 to 17-year-olds, 80% of the marriages were to individuals 21 and under. We said we better go a little bit further, right? Because these numbers are startling in terms of West Virginia being in compliance with the rest of the country. Perhaps these reporters who are listening around the world right now on the feed can dig into the very easy statistics we were able to pull up. In fact, we'll help them with those numbers on these fake news stories. Since 2017, past 5 years, there was one 15-year-old female that married to a groom that was 19 years old. Let me repeat, one. There was one. In terms of boys, there were 2 15-year-olds in 5 years. And if you had 16-year-olds, it's 3 more. This horrendous, terrible, horrible West Virginia countryside redneck problem, where the heck's it at? Where the heck's it at? So I said, my goodness, if West Virginia is so far outside the norm, if those folks are playing politics with this issue, I said, I better take a look at what the rest of the country does on this subject. In the United States, the marriage age is set by each state. An individual in the U.S. can marry without parental consent at the age of 18 in all states except Nebraska, where the age is 19. And trust me, I'll just be another minute because I know we're late here. It might be 2 minutes. But most states have a minimum marriage age for minors with parental consent ranging from 12 to 17 years old. California and Mississippi don't have minimum ages. But I think these are notable statistics. Those folks who say, boy, West Virginia is just so far outside the mean. It's just terrible what they're letting happen there in West Virginia. It's ridiculous we let that narrative happen. It's ridiculous we let the narrative happen. They should be ashamed of themselves on the national level, writing these stories that are patently false. They can get the same statistics that I get. In Arkansas, the age of consent to marry with parental consent for males is 17. In fact, a lot of these states, they distinguish between male and female. Where's the equality there? Only matters in West Virginia when the national media do stories. Males is 17, for females 16. Delaware, the age of consent to marry for parental consent for males is 18, for females is 16. Mississippi, the age of consent is 17, for females 15. New Hampshire, check this one out. All those elite, smart folks up there. In fact, I think there's one of those Ivy League colleges up there in New Hampshire, if I remember right. Parental consent for males is 14, females 13. Ohio, the age of consent, 18, females 16. Rhode Island, 18, females 16. Puerto Rico, 18, females 16. And I won't read all these to you, but it's primarily 18 and 16 when you go right down this list. There's 39 of them on this list that's 18 and 16. We already have that. Judicial waiver for those 2 or 3 or 4 that were on that list. 18 and 16, 18 and 16. The only state that's not 18 and 16 is Nebraska. So I think there's some folks that think human trafficking and child exploitation, somehow through this bill, miraculously we solved the problem. Mr. President, we ain't gonna solve the problem with the marriage bill that's already pretty darn good compared to the rest of the country. I can tell you that I've spent a lot of time on this issue. Probably nobody in this chamber spent more time on child exploitation and human trafficking than I did during my term as United States Attorney. Over a 6-month period, I issued 27 search warrants, 19 arrests being made, and from that came 10 indictments and 9 convictions. I worked closely in the Southern District of West Virginia. I led the federal law enforcement effort to address and prosecute this issue. I worked arm in arm with the FBI, the Violent Crime Against Child Task Force, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the West Virginia State Police, who do an incredible job on this issue, local law enforcement agencies across the district, the Internet Crimes Against Children's Task Force, the West Virginia Child Exploitation and Human Trafficking Task Force. We place a priority on these issues in West Virginia. These are important issues to us. So those folks in the national media writing these fake stories need to take a look and try to at least get their facts correct. Fake news. It's fake news. And I'll just finish with this. My mom and dad, and you know I've told you the story about my mom and dad. They were extremely young when they got married. My mom was 16. I don't say that with any amount of shame. My mom and dad are my American heroes, and I won't apologize for that. 50 years later, they're like giddy teenagers. Can't leave their hands off each other. We didn't have a whole lot between us in our household, but they, I think, did a good job with this boy, this man, and my sister. They did a pretty darn good job. My parents, my dad spent 50 years working in the coal mines. My mom went back to school, became a licensed practical nurse through vocational education. And I'll say this, I make a joke about this all the time. My parents are so young. Someday we'll be in the same rest home together, and I'll get the privilege of paying for all of this. We'll all be there together. So I think it's important to understand what this bill is and what this bill is not. This isn't a cure to child sexual exploitation in West Virginia. I just want to say we want to solve those challenges. This is my final words here. It's going to take a lot of education. It's going to take a lot of money, more tools, more technology, more infrastructure, more professionals. more state police, local law enforcement, and more prosecutors, and I support all of that. That's a heinous crime. Our law in West Virginia is already pretty darn good. With this amendment, it becomes even better, and there's not a state in the country that can hold a candle to West Virginia on these issues. So I support this amendment. I urge passage. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Cabell.
Mr. President, and I want to compliment my good friends on the Judiciary Committee. We worked this bill pretty hard last night, and I certainly have the utmost respect for the former United States Attorney. And so what I'm going to say, I don't want anybody to take personally, but I do feel like some things need to be cleared up on this bill. I grew up on a farm in Greenbrier County, and one thing I learned on that farm was the stuck pig squeals the loudest. Now, I rise in opposition to the Child Bride Act of 2023. The financial, we should stick at 18. That's what came over from the House. All but a vote or two were in dissent. Everyone was in agreement on the 18. These young people have tremendous financial pressure. Not all the stories are happy endings, like my good friend from Putnam and my friend from Kanawha. Yes, many years ago, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, things were a bit different. There are family pressures. There are financial pressures. But not all stories end that way. I recall reading about a very young couple that got married. Pressure of their situation was so intense, he committed suicide, and she stabbed herself with his dagger. This is not a new problem. West Virginia has the highest rate of child marriage. Most of those marriages are 16 and 17. So if we don't leave this at 18, we've got the same problem. As the senator pointed out, most of these child marriages, these child brides, are 16 and 17. They cannot cast a vote at that age. They cannot enter into a contract at that age. I think the national media got it exactly right. I don't see a vast left-wing conspiracy of the media distorting anything here. Everything they said came right out of the committee. Yes, we can invoke the Ivy League and the liberal elites in the Northeast, but who's actually playing politics with this issue? I'm not. It's an important issue. Mr. President, we have spent a lot of money. Our state has invested a lot of money with your leadership and others in improving our national image. Now, every time we have a debate like this, talking about child brides, we add to that negative image. Let's leave it at 18. My God, it's marriage. How in the world can teenagers negotiate a marriage at this point? Marriage is for adults. I urge rejection.
Senator from Marion.
Would Chairman yield, please?
Will the senator from Morgan yield? The senator from Morgan yields.
I will yield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My concern is if a person marries under the age of 18, would they have the same legal rights as an adult if they find themselves in an abusive relationship?
In this bill, if the amendment is adopted, it would, I believe so, at least in terms of the ability to get out of the marriage. Let me find the amendment here, and I'll read you some language that's included in it. And we put a subsection E in this amendment that says a person who's under the age of 18 but at least 16 years of age and who is married in accordance with this provisions of this section may petition without the consent of any parents or guardians for annulment of that marriage until he or she reaches the age of 18. And then, of course, once a person's 18, you can petition for divorce anytime. So we did try to address that in here.
So would they have to be married until they're 18?
No, annulment of a marriage could occur prior to 18. You could ask for annulment of the marriage.
Counsel tells me that an annulment would need an actual legal reason to happen. But a divorce, would that not be different?
Well, divorce requires grounds in all cases. West Virginia authorizes irreconcilable differences divorces, but that has to be agreed upon by both parties. Otherwise, to get a divorce in West Virginia, a party has to prove a fault-related ground.
So a 16-year-old could do that?
Well, a 16-year-old wouldn't have to do that. A 16-year-old could ask for an annulment.
Okay. I don't understand totally, but I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman, as always. Just very briefly, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I rise in opposition to this, too. You know, I think if we're going to do things right, if we're going to finally do something right in West Virginia, let's make it 18. Let's consider them full adults before this happens. You know, we can toss around words like fake news all day long if we want to, but it's happening. It's not good for young people to get married. And the hypocrisy I just can't help but laugh. You know, we run bills here, and I won't get into those because it's not part of this amendment, and I know the rules, that we know doesn't happen in West Virginia, but that's not fake news. But this is fake news. Because you know why? It makes good fodder, Mr. President. It makes good headlines. You get to talk to the press, and you get to say how wonderful things really are in West Virginia. They're not. They're not. You should be 18 before you get married. I don't see any rational excuse to do anything other than that. I oppose the amendment.
Is there further discussion? Senior Senator from the 4th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to rise in support of the amendment as explained by the Senator from Oregon. And also, if we're going to talk about anecdotal situations as described by the Senator from Cabell, I'll get into some things that are anecdotal about West Virginia as well and personally. I really believe that a lot of the problems we have to deal with in this body have been from erosion of the family. I think that marriage being under attack, I think the traditional family being under attack has cracked the foundation that a lot of West Virginians stand on and frankly, a lot of the United States citizens stand on. And as the bill came out of Judiciary to this floor, there's absolutely no way that I would support it. And the reason is from personal experience. In personal experience, and I'll get very personal here because I got my high school sweetheart pregnant in high school. And in that case, I also got married in high school. Had my first child 5 days after high school graduation. I was working full-time. As a 16-year-old, working full-time as a 17-year-old. I worked 4 jobs through college. And the reason I did it was to support that little boy that was born 5 days after high school graduation. And I can tell you where I was headed before that was probably not a good spot because I was a bit of a troublemaker. But being able to marry at 17 years old to my wife, now who was also 17 at the time, gave that young man a family who's now 30, I think he'll be 33, and I'm sitting here, I think he's be 33, 33 here this year. We're still married now, 2 more beautiful children after that. And there's bonds that are created when you fall in love at any age. But when you have those 16, 17-year-old fiery passions and you want to be around each other all the time, everywhere, do everything together, and it's all you think about. We've all been there. And that doesn't suddenly fix something as far as the bonds then matter when you turn 18. We were pretty mature for 17-year-olds. I'll grant you that. And I realize the statistics don't match up, that if teen marriages last for 3 decades and more. But what I can tell you is the ability to get married kept a family together. Because I don't know if we could not have got married then, if I could have held that interest to go in and take that responsibility on, waiting a couple years when I got to shun that responsibility. And I don't know how many others like me there are. But what I do know is the amendment we have before us protects family. And I think we need a lot more of those, bring us back to that traditional family protection. So I do believe that the bill that came over was destructive to families. This amendment is not. I support the amendment and hope it's adopted.
Is there further discussion? Senator from Wetzel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the Judiciary Chairman please yield?
Senator from Morgan yields. Senator yields.
I will.
Just a simple question. If I'm a 16-year-old, can I go to another state that allows 16-year-olds to get married and get married?
I think under the law of the United States, you can.
Thank you.
Senator from Raleigh.
Thank you, Mr. President. No need for stories, just a statement. I fully support the amendment, and I thank the Judiciary Chair and the others who have worked so hard on that.
Further discussion? If close the debate on the amendment. Senator from Morgan.
Yes, Mr. President, thank you. So I know there are members of this body that want the minimum age in all cases to be 18. I would vote for that. In fact, I did vote for that when we had the bill before us in the committee, and it failed. And so that concerned me. It concerns me now. I'm pragmatic. You know, I want us to pass something because our current situation is intolerable. Junior Senator from the 7th spoke with great passion. He was gracious enough to give me a copy of the data that he got. And it is true, there are relatively few marriages that occur with either party entering into it under the age of 16. But I would submit to you, one is too many. One is absolutely too many. In the data that were gathered by the senior senator from the 7th, or junior senator from the 7th, the 15-year-old marriage is recorded here. There's one 15-year-old female with a 21-year-old male. Now, under our law, that would have had to have been authorized by a judge. And there was one with a 14-year-old female, marriage to a 19-year-old male. This amendment, if adopted and becomes the law, will eliminate those. I'll tell you what else it will eliminate. The data set gathered, it shows that among 17-year-olds that got married, let me do the 16-year-olds first. Among the 16-year-old females that got married over that period of time, there were 54 who were married to people who were 22 years old or older. 54. That includes 16-year-old girls, 10 of them marrying 21-year-olds, 16 of them marrying 22-year-olds, 9 of them marrying 23-year-olds. 5 of them marrying 24-year-olds. I can read it all out, but I'll tell you this. On the far right side of the chart, there was one 16-year-old girl who married a 40-year-old male, and one who married a 49-year-old male. A 16-year-old girl marrying a 49-year-old male in West Virginia. This amendment, if it becomes law, will prevent that. The amendment says you can't marry anybody who's more than 4 years older than you are. Now, for 17-year-olds, 17-year-old females in West Virginia, there were 84 who married males who were 22 years old or older. So that's more than 4 years older than the female. 23 of them, age 22. 20 of them, age 23. 13 of them, age 24. 9 at age 25. 4 marrying age 26 or an older male. 5 marrying a 27-year-old male. It goes out to the right. There are 17-year-old girls in this time period marrying people 31, 32, 37, 39. We have to stop this.
Mike.
It's permitted under our current law, and it's horrifying. And so, you know, if this amendment fails, I'm going to vote for the bill at 18. The amendment is offered because I'm trying to get something that I think can get across the finish line. But we have to do something now to protect the children of West Virginia. So, Mr. President, I urge adoption of the amendment.
Question before the Senate is the adoption of an amendment offered by the Senator from Oregon. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. I declare the amendment adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
No, sir.
Question is on passage of the bill. Senator from Oregon.
Very briefly, Mr. President, the bill now, I'm hoping we'll pass this bill. It will go back to the House. We're in disagreement with the House, you know, it's a better position than we had the other day with the bill lying dead, moribund in the Judiciary Committee. We're alive now. And hopefully, if we pass this, between the House and the Senate, we can achieve something that really does protect the young girls of West Virginia. I urge passage of the bill.
Question is on passage of the bill. Is there discussion? If not, the question for the Senate is, shall the bill pass? All those in favor vote yea. Those opposed vote nay. The clerk should prepare the machine. Has every member voted? Has every member voted? If so, the clerk close the machine and ascertain the results. On this question, 31 yeas, 1 nay, 2 absent, not voting. More than a majority of those present voting having voted in the affirmative, I declare the bill passed. The clerk has a title amendment.
Senator Trump moved to amend the title of the bill.
Question is on adoption of the title amendment. All those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. I declare the title amendment adopted. The clerk will communicate the action of the Senate to the House.
Engrossed House Bill 3439 to limit the civil liability of child placing agencies that obtain an insurance policy in an amount of not less than $1 million per incident. Third reading of the bill.
Are there amendments to the bill?